Hello, thanks for watching my Mother's Day story, A Note on the Tide. Unfortunately, when I did this live, I made a rather large error in that I forgot to unmute the sound, so the recording that we have of everybody listening doesn't have any sound on it. So I've synced up my sound from the camera with what I've got there, but the camera didn't record all the way through. So at the end of this story, you will see me just reading without seeing everyone else. Fortunately, you miss out on the discussion, but I promised that there was actually some very nice discussion about things found on the beach and being sort of instinctive hunter-gatherers and nice things like that. And Mum showed off some lovely shoals, which I will keep that bit of footage in just so you can see some of her beach combing finds. Hope you enjoy the story. Right, good morning anyone who happens to watch us on Twitch. Although I think most of you are probably elsewhere and will watch this later on. We're here to do some Mother's Day stories and poems. So I've got a little set of poems for you, and this is something that I'm going to put in the post when it's finished. It's not finished yet. It's just got this is the cover, and then it's going to have some other in-keeping illustrations inside, and the poems I'm reading today, plus some other ones that are yet to come, and then it'll be sewn up. So this will come and it will be a bit of a sharey. So you might have to say who has it for when or who keeps it, but so you can do a little poem book. Yeah, that would be nice. To get to my poems, I haven't thought about this very well. Okay, so I've just got two poems that will be in the book later on, and they do both kind of set the scene for what's in the story, so hopefully that makes them good. Now, so this first one is just called The Sea. In the water we begin. Life is born within the waves, rocked and nurtured in the tide. Changing, growing, stepping onto the earth, climbing, flying, learning, inventing, perhaps flying away. But life cannot exist without the water, and no matter where it finds a place, the sea always feels like home and welcomes its children back over and over again. And were we born on another earth, it's likely we still would come, in the beginning, from the water, the sea, the mother of all. Alright, so I'll do the second poem, which is called Tidal Drift. It's about things that get picked up by the water. Once lost, their story mourned, a mapbook made by their travels. 100 streams of shifting sands, worn and changed and battered. Tumbled, twisted, through rocky cracks, and in the deep where kelp takes hold. Many years, many waves might pass before their tales are told. Slowly, the tide's endurance conquers. Little by little, grip is lost, and rolled through soft-grained seafloor beds, they move onwards, here, forgotten. Emerging piled on unknown shores, once found, their story pondered. Fragments of history and tales, mysterious with salty wonder. A passing soul could chance upon a piece of life elsewhere, yet never know the story that carried those pieces here. So drifting fragments of unknown tales, carried away on the tide, when found again, must puzzle us, our new stories, inventing their lives. Alright, and so it's time for the story, I suppose. So this was the topic that Mum suggested about what gets washed up by the sea. I tried to combine it with some of the other suggestions that we had, so you might see a few other things in there that were in some of our topic suggestions last time. Abby sat on the big rock at the edge of the cove, eyes drifting in the salt air as she half focused on the patterns in the white water. There was a nostalgia in the sound of the swishing water against the pebbles. a call for her to be on 2 beaches at once. This one, quiet and mostly empty, and another full of bare feet treading the sand, close in her vision because she was, at that time, not very tall. Granny had stood, her sun hat in the collection bucket in her hand, and a soggy cap she'd retrieved from amongst the seaweed on her head, shaking a disapproving finger at a seagull that had hopped about at her feet. "You stay out of this bucket. That's enough of that squawking. No fish here, only rubbish to get tangled in." Abby was cackling at the seriousness of this discussion, a bit of balloon she'd picked up in one hand and one of her picnic sandwiches in the other. Screwy, Matthew's energetic black Labrador, came barrelling suddenly across the sand, and Matthew looked at Abby's sandwich in alarm and rushed after the dog, tripping over buckets and rocks and hopping one-legged half the way from a stubbed toe. Screwy was leaping for the prize, mouth open, when Matthew caught her by the collar, embarrassed. Sorry, he said to Granny. Abby smiled and put half the sandwich into Screwy's mouth, much to Matthew's consternation. Matthew was allegedly in charge of the afternoon's beach clean-up efforts. He looked about and seemed at a loss. "Matthew," said Abby, "when are you going to cook the sausage sizzle?" Mum came over, having spotted Granny's interesting hat choice, and overheard this. "Would you like a hand?" she asked, bemusedly swapping her mother's hats. Matthew looked relieved. Granny said, "That one was nice and cool. What have you put this old hot thing on me for?" The seagull just then made a valiant attempt to hop into the bucket, and Granny was distracted by the need to give it a telling off. Abby offered it some sandwich. About a week earlier, on another shore, Max had walked with his mother and his favourite red ball, a lovely rubbery textured shiny red ball that bounced wonderfully off the walls of the shed at home and was scattering seagulls as he ran along the sand. His mother was sifting through a long thin drift of pebbles and shells washed up on the tide, treasure hunting. She picked up smooth pebbles and ran her fingers over them, gathered interesting shells and driftwood in a cotton bag with a zigzag pattern that hung over one shoulder. "Look, Max," she called to him, holding up something she'd found. "This one's a fossil." Max hurried over, bare feet prickling on the pebbles, his bowl lying forgotten on the sand where he'd kicked it. His mother showed him a white bleached shell that looked something like a crab, with what looked like sand inside it, but when Max poked at it, he found that it was stone. "Was it a dinosaur?" he asked, looking up at his mother inquiringly. Mum thought about this. "It might not be that old, but you never know, Max. Things in the ocean with shells haven't changed as much since the time of the dinosaurs as things on land. Perhaps it's a dinosaur crab." She put it in his hand. "The sea keeps lots of little bits of history like that. It's a bit like Mother Earth is teaching us things about the past when they wash up." Max turned the fossil over and over, trying to imagine where the dinosaur crab's legs had been. "Who is Mother Earth?" he asked. His mother contemplated. "She's the planet, sort of the mother of all the creatures and plants and things that live here, including us." Max looked out to sea. "Does she make the dolphins hot chocolate so they have a good sleep?" Mum chuckled. "I'm not sure entire planets know about hot chocolate. But she does her best to look after us, and we have to look after her too." Max, however, had stopped listening and was looking out to the waves with an expression of increasing anguish. His mother followed his gaze. There, bobbing on the tide, was a distant red sphere, Max's favourite red ball. Max's mother looked down at him with just a hint of "I told you so" in the corners of her mouth. "Oh dear, Max, I did say you shouldn't bring it out in the wind, didn't I? Max looked crestfallen, and she softened. Never mind. The sea will take it and give it to someone special. It will probably make somebody very happy. Max digested this, still feeling the loss. After a while he said, I hope it's Batman. I think Batman would like that one. At the working bee. 1 week later, on the beach around the cove, Matthew and Abby's mum, Louise, were valiantly constructing a windbreak around the barbecue from tarpaulins and tall stakes that they drove into the sand. Meanwhile, several of the sausages were becoming somewhat char-grilled, and Screwy had stolen one. This was at the expense of a burnt paw, and the dog was now receiving first aid from the local vet, Monty, who luckily for Skewy had opted to help with the clean-up on his day off. Granny and Abby had been busy and were filling their bucket with bits of litter for the third time while this went on, to the accompaniment of squawks from the persistent seagull and stern words from Granny. Abby has already given you a sandwich. Now get going, you fat thing, Granny huffed, to the utter delight of her granddaughter, who was trying to get a chip packet out from under some rocks. The seagull, extremely discontented with the lack of further sandwiches, pecked Granny on the toe. That was completely uncalled for, Granny spat. Go and annoy someone else, you nincompoop. Abby cackled, finally working the chip packet free and taking it over to the bucket. On the way there she paused. Something had caught her eye, away over the rocks. Look, Granny! She waved the chip packet in the direction she was looking. A ball! Granny squinted. I can't see it, dear. Whereabouts? But Abby was already clambering over the rocks. Be careful, dear, Granny called after her, swatting at the seagull, who'd returned to hover around behind her. On the Sunday after the beach clean-up, Louise and Abby offered to take Skewy for a walk in the small cove around the bend, as Matthew had to stay in and do paperwork about their charity earnings, and as Matthew's neighbours, it was always in their best interest to prevent Screwy from getting bored. Bearing in mind Screwy's bandaged paw, the cove seemed a better contained walking spot. Abby brought the ball she'd found, tossing it for Skewy to chase and kick about. Both Screwy and Abby were having a great deal of fun with this, when Abby's mum suddenly exclaimed, Judy! And rushed over to warmly embrace another woman who was coming from the other direction. Abby picked up the bowl, and she and Skewy watched uncertainly. Abby didn't think she knew this other lady. How long was Mum going to talk for? Behind the strange woman, a young boy emerged, grabbing at her elbow and pointing at Abby. That's my bowl, he said. The woman turned to look. Abby looked down at the nice red bowl, a little disappointed. I think it might just be another red ball, Max, said Judy. But Abby came forward and held the ball out. I found it on the other beach when we were doing Clean Up Australia Day, she explained honestly. Did you lose it out at sea? Max looked at her wide-eyed. Yes. He put his hands out for the ball, but as Abby went to pass it over, to her surprise, he pushed it back to her. The sea gave it to you, he said, sounding sincere, if a little surprised. Abby broke out of her reverie as a thud near her foot announced the arrival of a rather faded rubber ball, more dark pink than red, from years of sunlight and wear, and being pumped up. She leaned forward from her seat on the rocks and picked it up. Hey, Max, she said, without turning around. Did you bring the tea thermos?